Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Oliva from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities.
And I'm Marc Dones from the National Innovation Service. We spent some time over the past few months talking with people whose identities align with marginalized groups and who are living through experiences of homelessness at the same time as they're living through the COVID-19 pandemic. We asked questions about what's working and what's not in the services they have experienced on their way to finding a safe and stable place to live. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we heard and what our recommendations are in response to lead us to make decisions differently that promote equity in local homelessness response systems.
So Marc, one of the things that I appreciate about this set of activities that NIS went through is that it promotes two things that I think that we as a community and as a movement need to hold on to. First, it reflects a set of values that include making opportunities for people experiencing the problem that we're trying to solve so that they can voice challenges that they're experiencing in the system and also offer solutions for those challenges. So that was the first thing. And second, I think it gives us an example of how to thoughtfully and pretty quickly have conversations to get a sense of where marginalized people are facing the biggest challenges within the system, and therefore start to open up ways that we can make the system more equitable in the long run. So can you tell us what the big takeaways are for you from the conversations that you had?
Sure, but let me take a step back and talk a little bit about what we did and how. We gathered a group of national, state, and local leaders from across the country who were actually part of those historically marginalized communities themselves and in the housing and homelessness sector. And we asked those folks who we should be hearing from and what we should be asking. I want to highlight that because I think that was our first step in making the conversation different, right? And thinking differently about who gets to decide what the question is and what the conversation should be. From that group, we decided we needed to focus on the experiences of Asian, Black, Latinx, Native and Indigenous, Pacific Islander, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and queer folks, and trans folks, people living with disabilities, people with incarceration histories, and people involved with public systems. And those public systems could be child welfare or juvenile justice or other associated systems that we know correlate with the experience of homelessness. We then recruited people from across the country who were living through COVID and experiencing housing instability to attend focus groups with us that were based on those identities. And one of the things that I'm actually quite proud of is how wide we were able to reach, right? We've all struggled a little bit with what it means to do work virtually during COVID, but one of the things that was great about this actually was we were able to hear simultaneously from people in Alaska and in Florida about the issues that they were facing in their communities. So we had those focus groups, right? And then we took what we heard and turned those into briefing documents that reflect back what people said to us and offer some recommendations on what system influencers and administrators can do. And I want to be really clear. These recommendations are not sugar-coated or diluted because we had to write what people said. And that's really important, right? That when people tell you something and when you offer them, right, the opportunity to speak their truth, that you honor what they've actually told you. So I think it's important that we acknowledge up top that these are hard things, right? They're going to be hard things to implement. They're going to be hard things to hear, let alone to do. But it's crucial that we really pay attention to what it is that people have said to us and begin to operate in integrity with that.
So I'd love to hear you talk for a minute about why those things are important and what it means to make recommendations that stretch beyond what's easy or what we think we might be able to achieve or at least achieve quickly.
I think it's important for us to acknowledge, right, that like we as people and as systems designers and therefore the systems that we build are prone to choosing the path of least resistance, right? We're prone to doing the thing that feels like it is the simplest, and we may make compromises, right? Because something is easier, right, than the harder thing. And I've watched, frankly, our sector do that over and over and over again. We reach out to folks who are living the experience of homelessness, who are from historically marginalized communities. We ask what their thoughts are, and then we disregard those thoughts because what they tell us to do is hard. And so instead, we talk to each other and to other folks in positions of power and relative comfort, and we say, well, that's just too hard to do. So what if we do this thing instead? Or what if we do kind of part of it, right? And I just don't think that we should do that anymore. I think it's time, particularly in this moment, right, in this electoral moment, in the world that we're living in, that we actually say as a field, right, if we want to make the meaningful progress that we intend to see, we actually have to live into these values every day, even when it's hard. So how do we expect to get to that world, right, if we don't actually put in the effort and address the issues that people raise for us?
I think that's right. I mean, I certainly can say that I've experienced the discomfort of creating recommendations or goals that I didn't know exactly how to achieve, but we wanted to say them out loud anyway. And I also know that we as a system won't stop doing harm really until we're honest and forthright about the things that need to change. So let's go there for a minute. What were the recommendations from the people that you talked to? What came out of those conversations?
There were 4 themes of recommendations that emerged across nearly every one of the identity groups that we sampled. The first is we need to implement a crisis response system that ends the use of large congregate shelter and creates dignity-based, safe, temporary crisis options as a bridge to long-term housing. I want to be really clear about that because I think that's the hardest thing that we heard, right, is simply that our entire shelter system, right, the way it's designed from the ground up is not serving people, and it actually is causing quite a bit of harm. And that's going to be tough, but it's something that we have to act on. The next thing that we heard was that we need to build, support, and fund dignity-based services led by the communities most impacted by homelessness. I remember, conducting specifically the focus group with Native folks and hearing repeatedly, right, that Native and Indigenous communities needed to be served by Native and Indigenous people, or at the very least, people who were part of the community, right, that understood the lives and realities and value systems that folks were trying to live inside of. The third is to develop affordable housing in the most impacted communities and target housing and rental assistance to those most impacted by structural inequity. What this means is that we can't just do the broad grab bag eviction prevention programs, but we actually need to look at who is most likely to experience homelessness in relationship to equity and particularly racial injustice. And then finally, we need to divest from policing and remove police from the homelessness response system and invest a portion of those funds in the housing and services that communities most impacted by police and police brutality need. I think again, right, like what we heard from people over and over again was that they experienced harm from police interactions and not actually successful connections to help. And we just need to hear that, right? I know that our intention is different, that we want different things from these interactions, but it's time for us to face that we're not getting those results.
Those recommendations seem to be about things that aren't necessarily COVID related.
That's right. I think that what we learned actually is that the pandemic has just highlighted things that have been broken for a long time. And in fact, one of the starkest things for me in my experience conducting several of these focus groups was that when I asked people what had changed since the pandemic, there were often these silences where people really were like, well, not much. And that, I think, is the most devastating thing for us to face, right? That a pandemic that has fundamentally altered the texture of life for most people in the United States did not radically change the experiences of folks currently without homes. And that alone should tell us how much we need to change our system.
Thanks, Marc. Any last words before we close out?
I think, Ann, you and I have worked together for a long time, and I think we both had the experience of feeling like we are repeating ourselves. So I'm going to repeat myself just a little bit and say that I do fundamentally believe, right, that we have an opportunity in front of us to transform how we approach housing and homelessness in this country, and that we have an obligation to do so. But in order to do that, we actually have to just change our fundamental approaches, right? We have to believe that our approaches are oriented in racial justice and in the creation of equity, not in the navigation of scarcity, right? We have to believe and create realities where we are not questioning people's needs, but rather simply meeting the needs that people say that they have. I really think that we can do this. And I think that our work and the work of the coalition that we've formed in order to advance this equitable response to COVID is in fact bigger than COVID, right? That it actually is about the fundamentals of what we do. And I think we can get to a really important and new place together.
Thanks, Mark, for your time today. And to the audience, check out the briefs and the themes document on our website at housingequityframework.org for more detail on what people told us and the themes and recommendations that emerge from those conversations.